Humanity had waited 50,000 years to make the Vidians choke on their own blood, and it started today. The two Vidian diplomats spoke in hushed tones as they looked out over the glimmering crystal spires of the capital. The older one, Grus, had a face creased with too many years of secrets. The younger one, Zoltan, looked like he had just shit out his spine when Grus broke the news. "It's impossible," Zoltan hissed. "The humans are dead. The Galactic Council made sure of that when they blasted that dirtball Earth into a debris field. There's no way they could have survived that." "They did," Grus said, his voice heavy. "Somehow they escaped the destruction of their world, and all this time while we thought they were dead and gone, they've been out there, hiding, growing stronger, waiting for their chance to strike back at us." Grus's mind flashed back to that fateful day, 50,000 years ago, when the human diplomat Jerry Simmons had stood before the Galactic Council and begged for their help against the Vidians. He had presented evidence of the Vidians' treachery, of how they had been funding space pirates to raid human colonies, to keep humanity from becoming a threat. But the Council had laughed in Simmons' face. The Vidians were one of the most advanced races in the galaxy, while the humans were still fumbling their way into space. In the end, the Council had not only refused to help, but voted to have Earth destroyed, to put an end to human aggression once and for all. Grus could still remember the look on Simmons' face as he was dragged away, screaming his final words, "You may kill us, but you'll never destroy us. We will have justice." And now, it seemed, that day of reckoning had finally come. Transmissions had been intercepted, reports of human forces systematically conquering star systems at the edges of Vidian space. They were coming, and if the Vidians didn't find a way to stop them, their entire civilization would burn. Grus nodded grimly. The humans were out for blood, and they wouldn't stop until they had their revenge. The Vidians had to be ready to fight for their very survival. Outside the window, the sun was setting on the Vidian homeworld, and in the gathering darkness an old enemy was coming to settle a 50,000-year-old score. Zoltan felt the blood rush from his head. How? How did they survive the destruction of their homeworld? The younger diplomat braced himself against the window, looking as though he might faint. Grus's voice remained steady, though his eyes betrayed a deep unease. "Our intelligence reports suggest that the humans had established hidden, self-sufficient colonies scattered throughout the galaxy. A backup plan, in case the worst happened." Zoltan shook his head in disbelief. "And we never knew, never even suspected." "No," Grus admitted, "and in our arrogance we may have inadvertently hastened their resurgence. Every raid on their colonies, every piece of technology we stole, they were studying it, reverse engineering it, using our own advancements against us. In the span of 50,000 years they've leaped centuries ahead of where they were." The elder diplomat's gaze grew distant, his mind drifting back to that fateful day in the council chambers. "I spoke with Simmons, you know, after his speech. There was something in his eyes, a conviction that shook me to my core. He wasn't begging or pleading. It was the look of a man who knew beyond any doubt that his people would have their vengeance, even if he didn't live to see it himself." Zoltan swallowed hard. "And now they're here, conquering our fringe systems, inching closer to the heart of our empire." Grus nodded grimly. "The conquests are just the beginning. There are whispers, rumors, that human saboteurs have infiltrated every level of our society. The government, the military, even the council itself. They've been here for decades, maybe centuries, patiently laying the groundwork." "Infiltrators here?" Zoltan's voice rose in pitch, edging toward hysteria. "If that's true, then a coup—" "Could be imminent, yes." Grus finished the thought, his tone heavy with dread. Zoltan's mind raced, trying to find some shred of hope to cling to. "But our fleet, surely they can't stand against the might of the Vidian Armada. We're the most technologically advanced race in the galaxy." Grus turned to face his younger colleague, his expression darkening. "Are we? A species that couldn't even detect an enemy growing in its midst? An empire so blinded by its own superiority that it dismissed a dire threat until it was too late?" A heavy silence hung in the air as Zoltan struggled to process the immensity of the situation. He turned to Gruss, his voice barely above a whisper. What could the humans possibly hope to achieve against the combined might of the Galactic Council races? Gruss met his gaze, a grim expression etched on his face. It's not about what they hope to achieve, Zoltan. It's about what they're willing to do. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. Our intelligence suggests that the humans have been using their advanced technology to quietly sow discord and conflict among the Council races, weakening us from within. Gruss paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Remember the Calgon-Neridian War that broke out last century? The one that left both their homeworlds in ruins? We now believe human agents orchestrated the whole thing, playing both sides against each other. Zoltan's eyes widened in disbelief. They would go that far, sacrificing entire worlds just to weaken the Council. Gruss nodded solemnly. It seems to be their strategy. Let the Council races exhaust and destroy each other, so that when the time comes, the humans can swoop in and take on a fractured Galactic Council. Zoltan shook his head, trying to wrap his mind around the depth of the humans' hatred. But how could they maintain such a burning desire for revenge for so long? It's been 50,000 years. Gruss's expression grew haunted. You didn't see the recording of Earth's final moments. As the planet crumbled under the Council's bombardment, the humans broadcast one final message to the stars. We do not forgive. We do not forget. They've passed that mantra down through the generations, Zoltan. It's become their rallying cry, their reason for existence. Zoltan frowned. A distraction from what? Gruss met his eyes, a deep unease reflected in his own. That's just it, we don't know. We're so focused on their conquests, on the immediate threat, that we're not seeing the bigger picture. And that, Zoltan, is exactly what they want. Zoltan felt a cold chill run down his spine as Gruss spoke. He turned to the elder diplomat, his voice trembling. Their endgame, what could they possibly want? Gruss hesitated, his eyes growing distant. I fear they won't stop until they've brought the entire Galactic Council to its knees, or worse. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a hushed whisper. Our agents have uncovered a disturbing pattern. Key leaders across Council space have been systematically assassinated, critical infrastructure sabotaged. It's causing widespread chaos and panic. Gruss's face grew grim. Just last week, the Arcturian Prime Minister was found dead in his office. No signs of forced entry, no evidence left behind. It had to be the humans. Zoltan's eyes widened in shock. The Arcturian Prime Minister, but their security is impenetrable. Gruss nodded solemnly. Not to the humans, it seems, and there's more. He glanced around as if afraid of being overheard. There are whispers of a secret human weapon, something called Project Phoenix. They say it could cripple entire planets without firing a single shot. Zoltan's blood ran cold. A weapon? What kind of weapon? Gruss shook his head. We don't know what it is or how it works, but if the rumors are true, the Council may be facing an existential threat. He sighed heavily, the weight of the galaxy seeming to rest on his shoulders. I've been secretly reaching out to my contacts in other Council races, trying to warn them about the human threat, the need to prepare. Zoltan leaned forward. And what did they say? Gruss's expression darkened. I've been met with disbelief, dismissal, even accusations of fear-mongering. They don't want to believe it. He shook his head in frustration. They can't fathom that the primitive race they once looked down upon could now pose such a danger. That arrogance will be their downfall, and perhaps ours as well. Zoltan slumped back in his chair, his mind reeling from the revelations. The humans, the race they had thought long dead, were not only alive, but had become a shadow. Zoltan's mind raced as he tried to process the magnitude of the threat they faced. He turned to Gruss, desperation creeping into his voice. What can we do? There must be some way to stop them before it's too late. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I've been in contact with a Crinian defector. He claims to have worked on a joint human-Krynian research project decades ago, before the Krynians cut ties with the humans. Zoltan's eyes widened. A defector? What does he know? He says he has information about human weaknesses, technological vulnerabilities that we could potentially exploit, Gruss explained. But he's only willing to share this information in exchange for asylum and protection. Gruss's expression darkened. From the humans, he's terrified of what they'll do to him if they find out he's talking, and given what we know about their infiltration capabilities, his fear is justified. Zoltan nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. So, what do we do? Gruss took a deep breath before responding. I propose we meet with him, secretly on a neutral planet. We hear what he has to say, and then decide on our next steps. He fixed Zoltan with an intense stare. If his information is legitimate, it could be the key to stopping the humans before it's too late. But we have to be careful. If the humans catch wind of this, they'll stop at nothing to silence him. And us. Zoltan felt a chill run down his spine at the thought, but he knew they had no choice. It's a risk we have to take, he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. Gruss nodded in agreement. I'll start making arrangements for the meeting. We'll have to be discreet, use back channels and intermediaries to avoid detection. As they began planning the clandestine rendezvous, a nagging thought tugged at the back of Zoltan's mind. He glanced around the room, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Gruss, he whispered, leaning in close, do you think they know, the humans? Do you think they're watching us even now? Gruss's expression was grim. I wouldn't put it past them. We have to assume they have eyes and ears everywhere. Zoltan nodded, steeling himself for what lay ahead. They were walking a razor's edge, and one misstep could spell doom for them all. But if there was even a chance this defector could provide the key to stopping the humans, they had to take it. The fate of the Vidian people, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. Gruss and Zoltan slid into a grimy booth in the dimly lit bar, their eyes scanning the room for their contact. The air stank of stale smoke and cheap liquor. A few moments later, a hooded figure slipped into the seat across from them. Zorax, Gruss ventured. The figure nodded, glancing around nervously before speaking in a low, raspy voice. I wasn't followed, at least I don't think so. Zoltan leaned forward. You said you had information about the humans. Zorax licked his lips, his hands trembling slightly. Yes, I worked with them years ago. A joint project between our species. Gruss's brow furrowed. What kind of project? We were developing a new energy source, Zorax explained. Something revolutionary. It was supposed to change everything, make deep space travel a reality. Zoltan and Gruss exchanged a glance. A weapon? Zoltan prompted. Zorax nodded, his voice dropping even lower. They were obsessed with how the energy could be harnessed, focused on something they called a doomsday device. From what I gathered, it could wipe out entire star systems in an instant. Gruss's eyes widened. Project Phoenix, he breathed. Zorax's head snapped up. You've heard of it? Rumors, whispers, Gruss said. A secret human weapon that could hold the galaxy hostage. Zorax nodded vigorously. That's it, that's what they're planning. He leaned in, his voice urgent. The human scientists, they had this saying, from the ashes of Earth, we will rise. I think it's a reference to their plan. To use this Phoenix weapon to burn the Galactic Council to the ground, Zoltan said, horror dawning on his face, and then build a new human-led order from the ruins. Gruss leaned forward, his voice intense. Zorax, we need specifics. How does this weapon work? How can it be stopped? Zorax wiped sweat from his brow, his hand shaking. I don't know all the details. It's been so long and I only saw pieces of the research. Let me gather my old notes, see what I can find. Give me 2 days. Gruss and Zoltan looked at each other, then nodded. 2 days, Gruss agreed. We'll meet here again, and Zorax, be careful. If the humans suspect anything... Zorax swallowed hard. I understand. He stood, glancing around one last time before slipping out of the bar as quietly as he'd come. Grus and Zoltan sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Zoltan spoke, his voice strained. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" Grus sighed heavily. "I don't know, but we can't afford to ignore it if there's even a chance." He trailed off, and they both turned to look out the grimy window. Outside, the alien city bustled with life, oblivious to the looming threat. As they left the bar and stepped into the crowded street, Grus couldn't shake the prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the feeling of unseen eyes watching their every move. Grus and Zoltan anxiously scanned the dimly lit bar, their eyes darting from one shadowy corner to the next. The minutes ticked by, each second stretching into an eternity as they waited for Zorax to appear. Zoltan's fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the table, his drink sitting untouched before him. He leaned in close to Grus, his voice a low murmur. "Do you think he's coming? What if he got cold feet?" Grus opened his mouth to respond, but before he could utter a word, a cloaked figure slipped into the booth beside them. The figure pulled back his hood, revealing the pale, frightened face of Zorax. With trembling hands, Zorax slid a small data chip across the table to Grus. "This is all the information I have on Project Phoenix, the specs, the science behind it, potential weaknesses, but I don't think it will be enough." Grus picked up the chip, turning it over in his fingers. "What do you mean, not enough?" Zorax swallowed hard, his voice dropping even lower. "From what I understand, the Phoenix device is already operational. The humans are just waiting for the right moment to use it. And when they do, it won't just be the end of the Galactic Council. It will be the end of galactic civilization as we know it." Zorax's face took on a haunted expression. "The Phoenix device doesn't just destroy planets. It erases them from existence. It's not just a weapon of mass destruction. It's a weapon of total annihilation." Grus and Zoltan exchanged a look of pure horror. The implications of what Zorax was saying were almost too terrible to comprehend. Zorax leaned forward, his voice urgent. "You need to get this information to the highest levels of Vidian government immediately. Push for a preemptive strike against the humans before it's too late." Just as he finished speaking, a commotion erupted at the front of the bar. Shouts and the sound of shattering glass filled the air. A deafening cacophony of shouts and shattering glass ripped through the dingy bar as a squad of armed humans burst through the door. Patrons scattered, diving for cover as the air crackled with the sizzle of plasma fire. In the chaos, a stray bolt caught Zorax square in the chest. The Crinian defector jerked, his eyes going wide with shock and pain. He slumped forward, his head thudding against the grimy table, a dark pool of blood spreading beneath him. Grus grabbed Zoltan's arm, yanking him down as another volley of plasma bolts scorched the air above their heads. "We have to go now." The two Vidians scrambled, keeping low as they wove through the overturned tables and terrified patrons. Grus's hand was clamped tight around the data chip, the small device feeling like a lead weight in his palm. They burst out the back door into a narrow, trash-strewn alley. The fetid stench of rotting garbage assaulted their nostrils as they sprinted, the shouts of the human assailants echoing behind them. Zoltan's breath came in ragged gasps as they ran. What do we do now?" he panted, his voice edged with panic. But even as the words left his mouth, a sinking realization settled in Grus's gut. If the humans had infiltrated the Vidian government, if they had agents at the highest levels, then who could they trust? The council chamber itself might be compromised. Suddenly a thought crystallized in Grus's mind, a fragile shard of hope amid the despair. "The Zelnians," he gasped out. "They're the only council race that opposed the destruction of Earth. They argued for diplomacy until the very end. If anyone will listen to us, it's them." Zoltan shot him a sidelong glance, his face a mask of uncertainty. "But how do we know they haven't been infiltrated too?" Grus shook his head, his jaw tight. "We don't. But right now they're our best hope. We need to get to Zelnia and pray that we're not too late." They altered their course, heading for the spaceport at the edge of the city. As they ran, Grus couldn't help but reflect on the bitter irony of their situation. 50,000 years ago, the humans came to us for help, and we turned them away, he said, his voice heavy with regret. Now we're the ones seeking aid, and the fate of the galaxy may depend on whether they're willing to listen. Zoltan was silent for a long moment, the only sound the rasp of their labored breathing. Finally he spoke, his voice low and strained. Do you think they will? Listen, I mean, after what we did to them. Grus didn't answer immediately. The weight of that question hung heavy in the air between them. As they approached the spaceport, the sleek lines of ships from a dozen worlds gleaming under the harsh floodlights, Grus finally replied, I don't know, Zoltan, but we have to try. For the sake of our people, for the sake of every race in the galaxy, we have to try. They slowed to a walk, trying to appear casual as they approached the ticket counter. Grus could feel the data chip burning a hole in his pocket, the fate of the galaxy resting on the tiny sliver of technology. As he handed over his credit chit to the bored-looking attendant, Grus sent up a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening. Let the Zelnians hear us, he thought desperately. Let them believe us. And let us not be too late. Grus and Zoltan stumbled out of their ship, their bodies aching from the long and tense journey. The gleaming spires of the Zelnian capital stretched before them, a beacon of hope in their darkest hour. As they were escorted into the grand chambers of the High Council, Grus clutched the data chip tight, the weight of its contents bearing down on him. The councillors listened intently as Grus and Zoltan laid out the terrifying truth of the human threat, their faces shifting from disbelief to grim realization. This is unprecedented, the High Councillor said, his voice heavy. A weapon capable of erasing entire planets from existence. It's almost too horrific to comprehend. Grus nodded solemnly. We believe it's called the Phoenix device, and if the humans use it, it could mean the end of the Galactic Council and life as we know it. The councillors conferred among themselves, their whispers urgent and strained. Finally, the High Councillor turned back to Grus and Zoltan. We will take this information to the Galactic Council immediately, he declared. We will urge them to take decisive action against the humans before it's too late. Your bravery in bringing this to us will not be forgotten. Grus felt a glimmer of hope spark in his chest. Perhaps with the Zelnians' support, they could finally turn the tide against the human menace. But just as he opened his mouth to thank the High Councillor, a deafening alarm split the air. The councillors leapt to their feet, their faces etched with fear. A Zelnian guard burst into the chamber, his eyes wide. We're under attack. Human ships have entered the system. Chaos erupted as guards rushed Grus and Zoltan out of the council chambers, the building shaking from the onslaught above. They were hustled into an escape pod, the hatch slamming shut behind them. As the pod jettisoned into the void, Grus stared out the viewport in horror. The Zelnian defense fleet was engaging the human ships, the void lit up with the fire of 1,000 suns. But even as he watched, Grus knew it was a losing battle. The human ships were more advanced, their weapons more powerful. The Zelnians were fighting valiantly, but they were outmatched. Suddenly a blinding light erupted from the largest human ship, a light so intense that Grus had to shield his eyes. When he looked again, his heart stopped. The Zelnian fleet was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. No debris, no wreckage, just gone. The Phoenix device, Grus whispered, a pit of despair yawning in his stomach. They used it. Beside him, Zoltan's face was ashen, his voice hollow. And we led them right to the Zelnians, the only ones who could have helped us. As their escape pod drifted through the debris of the battle, the weight of their failure pressed down on Grus like a physical force. In trying to stop the humans, they may have just sealed the galaxy's fate. Grus turned to Zoltan, his voice heavy with despair. What have we done? He whispered. What have we unleashed? The flickering light of the news feeds cast a sickly glow over Grus and Zoltan's faces as they huddled in the cramped, dimly lit room. The distant outpost was a far cry from the opulent chambers of the Galactic Council, but it was one of the few places left untouched by the human onslaught. Grus stared at the screens, his eyes hollow and haunted. Each new report brought fresh tales of destruction and despair. The Phoenix device, the humans' ultimate weapon, had proven even more devastating than they had feared. Entire planets, once teeming with life, were reduced to barren wastelands in the blink of an eye. "We were so arrogant," Gruss whispered, his voice heavy with the weight of their sins. "We thought we could control the galaxy, that we had the right to decide the fate of entire species, and now we're paying the price." Zoltan nodded grimly, his own face etched with the same despair. The human, they're not just seeking revenge, they're sending a message that they won't be victims anymore, that they'll never again allow themselves to be at the mercy of others. Gruss sighed, the sound seeming to come from the depths of his soul. And in doing so they've become the very thing they hated. They're not just destroying the Council, they're wiping out entire civilizations, billions of innocents gone in an instant. Zoltan's gaze drifted to the data chip, still clutched tightly in Gruss's hand. The information it contained, the secrets of the Phoenix device that Zorax had died to deliver, seemed so small and insignificant now in the face of the galaxy-wide carnage. But Gruss was already shaking his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "No, don't you see, this is our punishment, our penance. We brought this upon ourselves." And so they sat, two broken remnants of a once proud civilization, watching helplessly as the last vestiges of the Galactic Council crumbled under the relentless march of human vengeance. The mighty, the proud, the arrogant, all reduced to ash and dust in the face of a species they had once dismissed as primitive and insignificant. In the end, there was no victory, no triumph, only the bitter realization that their own hubris and cruelty had sown the seeds of their destruction. The Phoenix had risen, and from the ashes a new order would be born. But the cost was beyond measure. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.